Alright everybody, we're going to get another update on the native tank here. You might be able to tell that I'm in the middle of a water change. I've finished with my medication. I've used the Maracyn 2. If you're not familiar with what's going on in this tank, I had an outbreak of Columnaris. I've been treating it for 5 days with Maracyn 2. And now I'm doing a massive water change to get rid of the medicine. And I'm going to do one additional thing to make sure I've wiped out the bacteria that's in the tank. But while the tank's filling, we're going to have a little chat about the tank for a moment, and then we're going to go over and look at the second measure I'm going to do that I think is going to be the 1-2 punch that's going to make sure I eliminate this bacteria. A tertiary sort of little thing I'm using is this hydrogen peroxide here. I've gotten in there and I've sprayed quite a bit. I do this a lot anyway in my tank when I'm doing water changes, and I do it mainly I spray down the stuff on the back glass there. You can see how grungy all that looks, but you can also see how it's got some bubbles and stuff forming on it. That's from being sprayed with hydrogen peroxide. I've basically sprayed the entire inside of everything that's exposed down with hydrogen peroxide, and once the tank is full, we'll be able to see a bubble line where I sprayed, and you'll be able to see exactly how deep the water was when I did my water change. At any rate, the way I'm using this to make sure I kill off the bacteria is I got in there and I sprayed up under the lip. All up in there, you can kind of see how it's grungy and there's some algae growing. When I first started treating this tank, I didn't think about it. I just kind of started treating it in a panic, and I started treating the tank when it was completely full of water. Of course, immediately people started suggesting that I didn't have to treat the full 125 gallons. I could reduce the water level. I thought about it, and I'd already started it with the full tank and dosing it, and I thought about just what we're looking at now, all of this exposed rock and woodwork, and the damage that would either occur to the organisms that are growing on them, or I just didn't know. I just figured, you know what, we're going to clear the tank. And so we did. We used medication in the full tank. I ran it like it was, no different than normal. But I also know that I may have reduced the water level a little bit over the last 5 days due to evaporation or whatever. So I've now gotten in there with the hydrogen peroxide, and I've sprayed all up around the inside of that lip to make sure I've sterilized anything that might have been up there, in addition to anything that was living in the tank. I want to also make it clear that while hydrogen peroxide is very handy to have around the aquarium and to use in and around the aquarium, it's also really dangerous, and you can really do a lot of damage to your animals. You can even kill them with just a very small margin of error. And I've never gotten into talking about doing anything with the hydrogen peroxide for that reason. I don't want to put some information out there and then get people using this stuff and wind up wiping all of their fish out. That can be one of those scenarios where a little bit of knowledge can be a dangerous thing, and I think of that as like a chef that's learning to prepare fugu sashimi. I wouldn't eat it. I'm sure they've got the skill, they know how to do it, but you know what? That's just enough information to be dangerous. I'm going to go ahead and pass on that. So I don't want to be the guy that gives just enough information about how to use hydrogen peroxide in your tank and then have people say, well, I didn't know this was going to happen or that was going to happen. There's tons of information out there if you want to look up how to use hydrogen peroxide and the various uses in your tank or whatever. I made many mistakes along the way. I learned the hard way too many times, and I just don't want to be responsible for being the guy that put that information out there. So that is why I never go into any details about how I use the hydrogen peroxide or what I do with it. But suffice it to say, it can be very effective when used properly, and it can be very dangerous when used incorrectly. So, having said all of that, the final point I want to make about the tank itself is that light fixture. I finally got up there and I checked it. I looked at the tubes. In fact, they're right here. You can see the ends of them are not even remotely darkened or anything like that. So I went ahead and put different tubes in it just to see if they worked, and I got nothing. They didn't even flicker. I couldn't hear the hum of the ballast or anything. So that fixture is probably just burned out, and I need to go ahead and replace it. And I don't even need to buy new tubes. I can use the tubes that I've got right there that I just had in my hand, and that will be fine. So that light fixture costs me a whopping $12 at the Wally World, and does not include the tubes, as I said, but it doesn't matter. I've got other tubes. I mean, we just looked at them. I got those tubes to use. It is just a shop light, and it is manufactured by Lights of America, I believe. I don't see their logo on here anywhere. But they really are like $12 at the Wally World, and it's a twin tube T8 fixture. So if you want to spend a lot of money to get one that says it's for your aquarium, go ahead. It's going to do the same thing this does. It's going to light up 2 T8 fluorescent tubes over your aquarium. Normally I get a few years use out of them before I start having issues with them. They're cheap, you know, $12. You're not buying NASA approved lighting fixtures or anything like that. But for $12, I generally get several years use out of them. I've had one hanging over my washing machine that we're about to go look at in just a minute here. I've had that hanging there for years without any issue. So this is one of the oddballs. I've had it for about 9 months and it stopped working. You know, make what you want of that. Like I said, for $12, I'm fine with that. I can go out and buy a new one if I get 9 months out of that one. You know, maybe if I'm going through a new fixture every 9 months, that might be a different story. But so far, that's not been the case. At any rate, now we are going to actually go over to my workstation while the tank finishes filling, and we're going to look at what I'm going to do for the final whammy that is going to make sure I've killed that bacteria off in this tank and it will not be coming back and bothering us again, provided, of course, I don't bring it back into the tank by adding new animals, but that's a topic for a different video. So hang on a minute and I will see you over at the workstation. Alright, and the killing blow is going to be salt, and a lot of it. By the time the tank is finished filling, that is how much salt we are going to put in it. So before I get to that, I want to cover a couple other little details really quickly. I did check my pH. The tank water and my tap water were close enough. They were 1/10 of a point off, so big water change really shouldn't have too much of an impact on them. I'm happy to say that after all of the medication that was in the tank, I was worried about the antibiotics killing off some of my beneficial bacteria in the tank and affecting my nitrogen cycle, and I got zero impact on my nitrogen cycle whatsoever. It is perfectly fine. So, getting back to the salt. The bacteria itself, the Columnaris, cannot live in salty conditions, even slightly salty conditions. I'm not even talking like brackish water. It just cannot tolerate even a little amount of regular old sodium chloride in the water. So we're going to go ahead and salt the tank, and I know that looks like a ton of salt, and it is. It's downright heavy. That is 7.5 cups of salt, and that is the equivalent of 1 tablespoon per gallon for 120 gallons. We're going to assume that even though the tank is a 125, it doesn't exactly have 125 gallons of water in it. So we're going to treat 1 tablespoon per gallon for 120 gallons, and we're going to do that for a day or two, and that should be more than enough. If any of that bacteria was left alive in the tank, it will kill it off. Again, will have no impact on my nitrogen cycle or anything else like that. I'm pretty sure the fish in there are going to be okay. I don't think this is going to be enough to affect them. They're all pretty hardy fish. The crayfish will certainly be fine. Again, this is going to be nowhere near approaching brackish water, and it is only sodium chloride. It is not the marine salts that are used to make brackish water. They have a whole variety of mineral salts dissolved into brackish water, whereas once again this is simply sodium chloride. This is the equivalent of if you bought aquarium salt. However, I just simply went out and bought a brand name salt. A few points about this that I think are important to make. One is this is not any special salt. It does not, it's not the kosher sea salt with no additives or anything. This does have anti-caking agent in it. It is not iodized, however. A lot of people misunderstand iodized salt. For one thing, a lot of people think iodine is what is in iodized salt, and it is not. It is iodide that is in iodized salt, and it's a trace mineral that's actually necessary for our health, and most people get very little of it. And if you just simply salt your food normally, the iodized salt provides you with that little bit of iodide that you need in your diet. So if this were iodized salt, you might be thinking, well, you wouldn't want to put that in your fish tank. And while you might not want to put iodide in your fish tank, the amounts of it in this salt are so small. They're infinitesimal. They're trace amounts. If you were to put enough iodized salt in your fish tank that the iodide was building up to dangerous levels, you would have long ago pickled your fish in brine. So don't worry about the iodide. I generally just get the kosher salt because it's available and it's cheap enough. I'm not usually using a bucket full of it like this. But for this large amount, for this brief dosage, I'm just going to go ahead and use this stuff. Now, a note about the anti-caking material in here. Let me see, I don't have my eyes on, but I'll see if I can. It's calcium silicate, that's what I thought. The cheap store brand had an anti-caking agent that was aluminum based. I don't believe it was aluminum oxide. I think it was alumosilicate. Either way, I'm not really sure of what the impact of putting even trace amounts of aluminum in the fish tank was, so I didn't bother. I spent the extra 15 cents or something. I believe these were 99 cents a piece, and I used almost 3 of them. The third one is upstairs because I didn't quite empty it, so I'm going to go ahead and use it. 99 cents a piece, so no big deal. $3 worth of salt in the tank, and there's no iodide. Even if there was, that would not be an issue. And the anti-caking agent is the calcium silicate. I'm not the slightest bit worried about trace amounts of calcium going into the tank. That I could put quite a bit of calcium in that tank and it would be fine. And the silicate, likewise, it's, a little bit of dissolved silicates in that water is not going to be an issue whatsoever. And again, there's no iodide in this salt. So I'm going to get working on it. Two final points. This is a hydrogen peroxide and water solution, and I've been using that to sterilize my nets between dippings. So I am going to try to get better at keeping my nets clean and sort of cleaning my equipment from one tank to the next, and hopefully preventing any catastrophes in the future. And the final point is this salt is most definitely not going to get dumped into the tank. I don't know if you can hear Squeaker in the background, but he's driving me nuts. He wants dinner or something. Always dissolve your salts before you actually put them into your tank. Never just pour salt directly in there. This is going to get slowly dissolved into pitchers of water, and then as I'm topping the tank off and filling it up, we'll go ahead and pour the pitchers in one at a time. And by the time we're done, can you understand why his name is Squeaker now? It should be more like Screamer or something like that. Man, he gets on my nerves sometimes. At any rate, I'm going to get started on that and go find out what the hell he wants. And we will go over to the tank once we're all done and have one final look, and we'll get the before and after. So sit tight and I'll see you over there in half a second. Alright everybody, that was adorable when he was a kitten, but boy has it gotten annoying as he's gotten older. At any rate, we are here at the tank. I've got some hot water with a ton of salt dissolved into it, and I just wanted to give you a look at how extreme this actually looks when I pour it in the tank. Now I'll give that a few minutes to mix around and swirl into the tank. You can see the fish just swimming right through it. It doesn't bother them at all. And it takes a moment or two, but it starts spreading around. That power head in the back's moving quite a lot of water. That's the only thing that's actually moving the water at the moment, but that's a 1,500 gallon per hour power head. So you can see it sort of spreads it out pretty quickly. I've got the water turned off. We're not filling anymore because we're getting pretty close to the top, and I'm going to take maybe another 10 or 15 minutes to finish this process, adding a little bit at a time. I'm only about a third of the way through dumping the salt in there yet, and that's when I finish with this one, which what we poured in was not even half of what's in this container yet. So I've got a lot of salt left to pour in this tank. So I'm going to go ahead and let that spread around for 5 or 10 minutes while I dissolve some more salt into the next batch, and we'll keep doing this, and hopefully here in the next 10 or 15 minutes or so we'll be able to finish it off, and then we'll go ahead and top the tank off, and we'll follow up with any afterthoughts. Alright, there you go. So not a whole lot more to talk about. I do want to mention one more thing about the salt, and that is that when I first started reading about taking care of the bacterial infection, it mentioned using salt in the tank, and I skipped down to where it talked about the medication. If I had read more about the salt, I would have learned that I simply could have probably just used the salt by itself and wiped this bacteria out pretty much overnight. I did not, however, and that's my fault for making the assumption. And the assumption I made was that it was simply going to refer to putting a little extra aquarium salt in the tank, as you are usually advised to whenever you've got some sick fish or you're recovering from stress or there's a little bit of ick in the tank or anything. It's almost always recommended to put salt in the tank. Now, sometimes that's because the salt has an impact on the disease or parasite or whatever, but a lot of times it is simply because in freshwater fish, the opposite is true in saltwater fish, but in freshwater fish, they expend a fair amount of energy trying to extract sodium out of the water. It's an electrolyte they need, and they actually have special cells in their gills, chloride cells, that are designed to pull sodium ions out of the water. So that requires energy. And if your fish is sick or stressed or it's dealing with something or its immune system's working hard, you basically want the fish to, be under as less stress as possible. So by giving it additional sodium, you're basically just letting it, get sodium a lot easier than simply, working to get it out of the water like it normally does. And I kind of assumed that's where we were going with the adding salt to the water. And again, I skipped ahead and went right to the medications. And it turns out that in this case, the salt is actually not only good for the fish in that regard, but it is also the cure to the illness. It's the bacteria cannot deal with sodium or salt very well at all. I'm a little surprised it took off in my tank the way it did. The tank is pretty warm. It's about 80 degrees, which is a contributing factor to the rapid spread of it. But it is also, I've got a lot of sodium in my water. I've shot plenty of videos about my water. I'm not going to get into a lot of it now. But the long and short is I have, just for lack of a better word, we'll call it a water softener right now. And that softener is an ion exchange medium, an ion exchange resin, and it exchanges the calcium and magnesium for sodium ions, and therefore my water actually already has quite a bit of sodium in it. Now, it doesn't have sodium chloride in it, and I don't know if that makes a difference or not, to be honest with you, but my water has a fair amount of sodium in it. It's still maybe not enough to be the same as what... Oh, I hope that came out on camera. He just yawned or whatever they do when they stretch their jaws out like that. I shot a video a little while ago between filling the tank up and topping it off and shooting this final scene here. And I attempted to feed him some worms, and he did not really go for them, but I did shoot a video about it, and it was reasonably interesting. And then shortly after that, we got another little video where this crayfish right here actually caught a living worm on the bottom, grabbed it, and started devouring it. So we do have a video of that as well. So it's been a pretty exciting day here in the tank. I do want to wrap up one final thought. If you notice, the water looks sort of whitish or something. It's really sort of oddly bright, and you can kind of see the water, if you know what I mean. I don't know, it's hard to explain. I don't know what causes that, but it's whenever I use a lot of hydrogen peroxide in the water, even after I've done a massive water change, this is what the water will look like for a day or two. So that lets me know I really went heavy on the hydrogen peroxide in this tank. Again, I'm not really sure what's going on there. I don't know if the hydrogen peroxide, there's still enough of it in the tank that water, the light bends as it moves through it and changes the wavelengths, and it appears to be a slightly different color. I'm not sure what's going on with the hydrogen peroxide in the water like that, but that's not the salt I put in there that's giving it that strange whitish appearance. When salt gets dissolved into water, it's crystal clear. So that again, is a mystery to me why that happens, but that's also a pretty good indication of how bad I blasted the tank with the hydrogen peroxide. So my final thoughts on that, once again, will be don't try this at home unless you really have done your research and you know what you're doing with the hydrogen peroxide. So on that note, I will thank you for watching this probably very long video by now. I will ask you to subscribe to my channel. That way you don't miss anything I got coming up or any of the other little videos I do. I've got plenty of other tanks. I've just been a little wrapped up with this one recently. So that's why I've been shooting so many videos of it. So thanks again for watching, and I will see you real soon on the next one.